thank everyone for being here. Mr. Harden as well, our magic behind the scenes with IT. I'm going to begin. I can just be aware, all of us can be aware which ones our members are on and which ones will be joining us shortly. And so let me just, I'm actually not going to go in any particular order, but rather I prefer to just go by way of names I have in front of me. So Vice Chair Lucas. You here with us, Vice Chair Lucas?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Hi, Ms. Bilal.
I'm here.
Good evening, Ms. Bilal. Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen here yet? I'm sure he'll be with us soon. Mr. Delgado. Mr. Delgado. Okay, not quite. Ms. Freeman.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, Ms. Freeman. Good evening. I believe is Mr. Johnson here yet? Mr. Johnson. Got it. Is Captain Oliver here with us? Then Oliver. Oh, it's Mr. Pulley. Mr. Pulley. Okay, Mr. Robinson.
I'm here. Good evening.
Mr. Robinson. Good evening. It's Mr. Rodriguez here. I don't think I see the lineup yet. Mr. Matthews.
Davis, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Mr. Matthews. And Mr. Woods. Mr. Woods? I believe I saw Mr. Woods earlier.
He's muted. He's muted.
I can still see.
Yes, there I am. Now I'm here.
Yep. Hi, Mr. Woods. Good evening. I can see you now. Hi. Good evening. Right. So we are just, I looks from my count, I'm sure others might have had count too. I believe we're missing 5 people right now. Mr. Allen, I believe Mr. Delgado, Captain Oliver, and perhaps Mr. Johnson and Mr. Sherrill. Those are my 5 there. And we'll just keep an eye out here, but we have enough to move forward.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
Mr. Johnson's actually on. He's on the phone call. Blake, if you could you bring him to the panelists, please?
Thank you. Thank you for moving him here. And thanks, Eric, for that eye out. And thanks, everyone, for the work you've done in between, always diligently in between our last meeting here, for the email communication here. We know to come together to hear from one another, each of the subcommittees, and to listen in on the preliminary recommendations that we've all compiled and put together to ensure that we have a concise and joint document. What I'm going to do, I know I just actually got one subcommittee's information right when we were coming on. So I'm going to try to filter that in so that everybody can see it. But for us to move along together and to be able to follow along, I'm going to send you the document, the working document I have right now. And it's going to be listed as draft. So we all know that that is still, it's a living, breathing document that will change tonight as we work together. But I figured it's probably best as you follow along, as each subcommittee presents their findings, that you have something to read. If you're like me, you read along a little better when you have something in front of you. Any questions or remarks here, Vice Chair Lucas, you as well here into that part of it?
No, I'm fine. I am trying to help Dr. Jackson get connected.
Okay, no problem.
Actually, if Eric or Blake or somebody could send Dr. Jackson the link. I sent out earlier so people could find it, but it's got to come directly from Metro.
Gotcha. Something we can get help with, if you don't mind.
Yes, I've already sent a link for that. And also, Mr. Allen is in the call. He's just considered a call-in user. He called in with a cell phone. I just want to ask him that when he's not speaking, please mute his handset, and then we.
Okay, I think I heard you, Mr. Harden, say that when he's not speaking, it'd be helpful to please mute his handset. And when that's us, if we're not speaking, we'll happy to comply with that. Okay, so let me just pause here, and I want to acknowledge, still believe we have Mayor Dean. Mayor Dean, is there any remarks or anything you'd like to share with the committee here before we get started?
No, I just want to say thank you for all your hard work, and I'm just here to observe and all get ready to kind of bring this project to a positive conclusion, hopefully.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely, we're eager as well. And Mayor Dean, actually, just so you can follow on with this too, we'll share that draft document with you as well. Everyone should have it in cyberspace heading your way right now, but I just sent it along. I don't have a preference on order. I don't know if any subcommittee prefers to go in a particular order. We do have certain groups. I think we have accreditation listed first, so we can certainly go in the order of the document, but I'm also comfortable with another subcommittee leading the way if you so choose. And really, let's just set the parameters around probably the best way for us to go through this is to start for the group with kind of your background, the focus of your group, how you approach your methodology of looking at the issues on the table. And then we'd love to just know if there were experts or there questions or witnesses you talked to as well that led you to the recommendations. I know many of us have been scouring through lots of reports and data and video, so that'd be helpful to know too. So that is there. I'm not picking on accreditation, but I'm also happy to go in that order too if there's no volunteers.
Yeah, Ashley, if you all can hear me, I'm LaShawn Oliver. I'm going to cover what I wrote and pretty much read verbatim what I submitted to this afternoon of our findings and kind of give you a background. So once I'm done reading those findings and whatnot, I'd be more than glad to fill in, ask questions. Myself, Linnell Matthews, and Tori Johnson were all on this subcommittee to look at accreditation. We also looked at the post commission and Metro's where they're at in regards to that, as well as the 8 Can't Wait. So on Friday, September the 25th, 2 p.m., this subcommittee met with Captain Christopher Gowder, Captain Gregory Blair, and I might have the ranks off a little bit, but Lieutenant Charles Vance and Tiffany Gibson were all present during this meeting. And the purpose of this subcommittee meeting or virtual conference was to meet with Metro Nashville Police Department to review their accreditation, Peace Officer Standard, and Training Commission annual training and their policies with regards to national endorsed 8 Can't Wait standards, and see where they stood and get any clarification or provide information and documentation as it related to those 3 areas. After we reviewed it, we got documentation and other things that we requested from Metro, and they obliged and provided those information that we asked. We reviewed them ourselves in comparison to best practices. One, in the area of accreditation, our first recommendation is that the Metro Nashville Police Department should be proactively included in a relationship with the COB under the discipline section in its next CALEA review. And CALEA is the, excuse me, the CALEA is the commission, or let me make sure I find it and read it right. The CALEA is the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, and it's a national governing body, and their recommendations when it comes to the discipline section in 2017 had stated that under the discipline section of the CALEA report, MNPD mentioned that current tools and processes for discipline were available. And since then, the COB has been formed. MNPD has had opportunities to proactively include its relationship with the COB as an improvement during its next CLEAR review. So I think this is an opportunity. Our committee had made that recommendation to improve that as per one of the guidelines for CLEAR. And then the second part of accreditation, one of our other recommendations is they should include language in its policies and procedure that ban and no-knock warrants. They don't currently use no-knock warrants, but there is nothing prohibiting them to use the no-knock warrant. So they should make that their policy consistent with their practices in this case. And one of the themes you'll see as I go through the other two recommendations that we had in other areas is that even though it's practice, it's not in writing and it's not in their policy, our recommendation is they put these things to mirror their practice and put it in writing. So number two, our second was the post-commission annual training. There should be additional trainings for the supervisor personnel annual to aid in the supervisors of MNPD. And part B to that recommendation was the replacement of the existing training academy that is too small and seriously outdated. It needs to be brought up to date and be invested in so that it's can meet the needs for the cadets and all those officers we're putting out in the street for MNPD to train and represent our community. And last recommendation came from the 8 Can't Wait. And since 8 Can't Wait launched, Nashville City's initiated a review on all of its MNPD's use of force policy that banned, and it came away banning neck restraints. The 8 Can't Wait website was last updated on MNPD's policy as of August the 15th, 2020. So that's just a little information on that. But what we recommend is that they should incorporate policies that fulfill the remaining 4 recommendations of the 8 Can't Wait. They meet 4, but there's 4 still out there, and where they're missing the mark is once again in putting this in writing. Practicing what's actually on the books do not necessarily match, and so there should be policy written. The following procedure should be updated. It requires de-escalation, duty to intervene, banning shooting at moving vehicles, and requiring comprehensive reporting. This all should be in writing and should match 8 Can't Wait. And in conclusion to our review of these areas, once again, accreditation, their post-commission standards, and the 8 Can't Wait, the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department meets or exceeds national and state, according to the Commission of Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies and the Peace Officer Standard Training Commission for the state of Tennessee. Our subcommittee's findings and recommendations are minimum. However, CLEAR recognized them in November 2017 and granted them reaccreditation for their continuous organizational improvement. The MNPD Training Academy sees the requirement of training when it comes to post-commission by 497.5 hours as documented by the post-commission as of August 29th, 2019. However, Metro's most prominent shortcoming discoveries by this subcommittee is its lack of written policy consistent with the 8 Can't Wait initiative. The ideas include conduct remedies like banning chokeholds, for example, changing reporting systems for use of force incidents, requiring officers to intervene when they witness misconduct, and more. These remedies do not cost money and could be implemented immediately. The police department have guidelines for use of force. An officer who uses force within the guidelines and operating by the book will not get in trouble if serious injury occurs to suspects or bystanders. However, officers who violate the guidelines is putting their career at risk. The campaign essence is 8 procedural rules that Campaign Zero claim data proven can conjointly decrease police violence by 72%. And so this was the model on which we based these recommendations, the 8 Can't Wait. And so there was 4 outstanding that needs to be put in some type of policy to mirror that. So I'll take any questions. That's our recommendations, and that was our processes and methods.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. And we have that one in front of us. Believe. Well, let's just go in our usual space. Any questions or comments here about what you've heard and also what you have in front of you? There. I'm gonna put this up myself. Mr. Oliver, can I ask you, and I know, just so I'm clear, if, the meeting next week, we'll take all of these, Ms. Lucas, I'll come right to you, to the meeting, and we'll submit this as in whole. If you had to kind of, let's just say, the one that most immediately is kind of low hanging fruit that the new chief of police needs to be centrally focused on right away, what would your subcommittee say that was? I'd just love to know that.
Yeah, I know Lionel's on the call, so he can interject as well. But for me, after reading and discussing and talking, I will say MMPD has a pretty good police department from our point of view and what we were looking at. But there are some things that they do need to seriously consider in accomplishing the overall goals. And 8 can't wait. It's simple, costs no money. And it's mainly saying what you're doing in practice or what you're claiming doing is also matched in policy. So there needs to be policy to govern what they're doing and allow accountability to any of those 4 other actions. They provided documentation where they're training on that, but it's nothing to match where I can look up a policy and say, this is this precise policy. And I'll give you one example. The shooting at moving vehicles was one that was noticeable to me right off the bat. From my years of experience in law enforcement, there's not much you can do if a vehicle's coming at you, and even if it's if you can get out of the way, that's great. But shooting at it doesn't stop the vehicle from moving forward, and it still puts your community at danger. So there is a reason why that policy is there. I couldn't imagine a circumstance where that should be permissible. So that's an easy one. But their policy don't necessarily state that. There's an exception, and it doesn't match that 8 can't wait standard. So some of those things are things that could be easily done right away.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews?
Yes, if I could interject, I agree with Sean on the 8 can't wait, but I would just add the policy recommendation that is a quick correction just by changing language is the no-knock warrants and making that a policy as well. It's practice, but right now it's not part of their policy.
Thank you. That's incredibly helpful. And Ms. Lucas, I believe you had your hand raised. Sorry.
Yes, I recently learned how to raise my hand on WebEx. I'm getting better at all this. A couple of questions. I believe that banning no-knock warrants is going to, that appears on our list as well. So just for Ashley to flag that as one area of overlap that I kind of anticipated was going to happen. But that would be definitely something for us to talk about, where it is probably best housed, whether that's use of force or accreditation or racial disparities. But my question for Captain Oliver is, NOAA sent a letter to Acting Chief Drake inquiring about a variety of things. And one of the things that we inquired about was 8 can't wait. And his letter dated September 16th said that MMPD policy incorporates all of 8 can't wait. And then my understanding from our trip to the police academy was that it covered 7 aspects of the 8 can't wait. And they wanted to retain, like Captain Oliver just explained, the one about shooting at moving vehicles. Now I'm hearing that we meet 4 and we miss 4. So I'm just curious as to where the accreditation team got their 8 can't wait information about what MMPD meets, and if we don't need to do some follow-up just to make sure that we have the correct information, just because there does seem to be some discrepancy.
Yeah, from the information they provided, and then from the National 8 Can't Wait, which is a project of Campaign Zero's website, August 15th was the last time that their information had been updated. So that was almost 2 months ago. So it could be up to date by now as we're speaking, but the documentation they provided me, one of the things I was looking for was the direct policy and I did not see in those 4. So it kind of coincided with what the 8 Can't Wait or Campaign Zero's website stated. So if it's somewhere written, it needs to be updated and then sent back out. But you're right. It's been consistent. The shooting and banding, shooting at moving vehicle has been consistent the entire time too. So.
Okay, so you literally compared the 8 Can't Wait principles from the Campaign Zero website with what's actually in the manual itself.
Yes, and the documents that they
Fantastic.
provided. Yeah, the documents they provided.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all the hard work on that. That's excellent.
Mr. Pulley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Forgive me, I got on about 10 minutes late, so I didn't hear any preamble that you might have had. So I have one administrative question for you as we move forward. It would be nice to have these recommendations to reflect upon them for a period of time, a couple of days, and be able to make more detailed comments. I can react to some of these, but will we be able to ask questions relative to these next week before we move forward as well, after we get an opportunity to review all of these recommendations?
Thank you, Mr. Pulley, and not to worry, we were a little behind here, so you were just fine when you arrived. So to answer your question, we all have the first run of the draft in our email. I'm about to send out the second one that is comprehensive of everyone's submission. Tomorrow is the deadline for submitting it. And when Ms. Lucas, keep me honest here if I mess up on the dates, to submit it to Ms. Cirillo and the team. However, the 14th next week, and I believe that is a Wednesday, so that is the half-day morning session where I, as well as Ms. Bilal, will represent the committee, and with a host of other representatives from the other committees, and we will present and talk through these recommendations there. I would say I'm more than happy. I can send out our finalized version. I will submit it to Ms. Cirillo tomorrow, but if anyone has thoughts or reflections that they want to make sure are raised, revisions to suggest, all I ask is that you hit reply all and send that to everyone for everyone's awareness, so that if there's a need to have continued dialogue, we can do that. I just would want everyone to have a chance to weigh in.
Sure. I just want to be thorough in my approach, and rather than be totally reactive to what I hear tonight, I just want to look it over thoroughly. So, but I appreciate very much your answer and giving us that opportunity, and we'll look it over once we get the data. I do have a couple of observations and questions. Number one, I think Ms. Lucas probably covered it, because my understanding is that the police department meets 7 of the 8 in the 8 Can't Wait criteria. So I'm surprised by the fact that the research shows otherwise, because my understanding is different. So I'd be interested to really further explore that to see what is factually accurate. Secondly, Mr. Matthews made the recommendation about no-knock warrants, and I would ask if there's any supporting data that he would bring relative to how often Metro uses no-knock warrants currently with that recommendation. And that's for Mr. Matthews.
Yes, I believe it was the deputy chief, I can't remember who spoke last week, but they presented and said that that's not a practice of Metro, but it wasn't policy. And so we had that discussion during the meeting last week, but I could certainly request that of MMPD.
Sure. My initial reaction to that is I'm hesitant when a department is very responsible with use of a tool like that to mandate its exclusion from their options, because even though that's a tool that should be rarely used, and was rarely used in my career. I do recall a handful of incidents where that was an absolutely vital tool for public safety. I know there's been some negative attention, so that's just my reaction. Again, that's reactive. That's not something that I put a lot of thorough analysis into. I just am reacting to the thought, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I really don't have anything else at this moment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I speak?
Yeah, of course, Dr. Jackson. Hi.
Yes. Thank you. I want to stipulate that I believe it's very important for us to say no-knock warrants. It's very important because a lot of times what might be a pseudo no-knock warrant would be a brief knock and then a breach of the doorway. And they say, well, that's not a no-knock warrant, but in all intents and purposes, it really is. And of course, I'm remembering back for the recent breach of the door in the Edge Hill project area with with the situation that occurred. So I think that's a very, very, very important element that needs to be emphasized. And thank you, Lionel Matthews, for doing so.
Ms. Davis, I think I enjoy this dialogue because I think it brings up some critical points in what we are trying to do as a committee, in that we visualize that the 8 can't wait. We went to the training academy. Captain Oliver's looked at some of the specific orders, and we've all talked to people individually or as groups with the department. And I do think it would be smart for the department to come out and respond to the 8 can't wait and those suggestions, just so it's out there, because I think the community just wants to know where the police department stands on that. And here we are as a committee, and we've been told one thing in the training academy, and then Captain Oliver asks for the policies, and Lionel asks for the policies and has a conversation. So it seems like the department is not really, or the beliefs might be that they are inconsistent, maybe is a good way to put that. And I personally feel like ultimately we should ask that they come out and even put that on their website if they adopt that, so it is very clear. We don't use no-knock warrants. That is out of policy. In a conversation with Lieutenant Dupuy, he did say the only time he's ever seen it used is the SWAT team, and Captain Oliver may know something more about that, and he talked about a dynamic situation where there's that's the only I guess the only possibility left, because they can't, knocking is going to harm somebody, I guess. So anyway, but I love the dialogue here, but I think it really points out, again, the inconsistencies through some of the leadership and training academy. So I would like for us to ask for that.
Yeah, let me reiterate if I can, Madam Chair.
Can I piggyback real quick off Mr. Robertson?
Is that Mr. Cheryl? Is that you?
Yes.
Yeah, Captain Oliver, is that okay? And we'll come back.
Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I remember talking to the gentleman about the no-knock warrant, and my only concern with that is that if it's not policy, now he clarified that they don't normally use that or pursue those type of warrants, but that's not to say that they can't. And even under the dire circumstances, he said that, we just don't do it because we want to make sure we execute the warrant safely, and that no matter who's involved, that they're brought to justice and everything is fine and nobody is hurt. But what if it's an underlining if it's a cultural thing, like, hey, we know we don't pursue it, but we do it anyway. Talking to someone who's been in raids, I've been in raids where they just knock the door down. Like they don't say, hey, it's the police, come out with your hands up. They want to catch you. It's the element of surprise. They want to keep that because if that's the issue, then they can catch you with whatever they're trying to catch you with. So it's mighty strange how they say that they don't pursue it, but it's not policy. And so we got to be careful with that. If you don't do it, then it needs to be written that you don't do it. Otherwise, it creates another issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. Captain Oliver.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, Mr. Robinson, and anyone who might have misunderstood what I was saying, and reiterate, it's not that I'm saying they're being not being transparent. The information that I couldn't verify, and their website is very robust. So a deeper look into all their policies, and there's a lot of them. They might have updated them, but it just needs to be more apparent where I can get it when I go look for it. But based on the documentations I did look at, that I did request, our committee requested, I did not verify a policy number where I can go look it up. Some I were, others I weren't, and those I weren't. It did match what 8 Can't Wait also indicated, and it was last updated from their website on August the 15th. So if it's been done since, it just needs to be more apparent so we can find it.
And Captain Oliver, if you'd like, I can connect you with people at MMPD and you can get some clarity on this. What they've told me is that they do match up on 7 of 8. The shooting and moving vehicles is what they describe as their difference of opinion. And they point to recent guidance from CALIA and PERF related to some terrorist attacks that have been happening since 2015 with moving vehicles as justification for that policy. They've complained to 8 Can't Wait for not updating policies, and the response they've received is that 8 Can't Wait can't update policies for every department given all the changes. So clearly there's confusion there, but I can help you make a connection. You can do some more explanation, and I'll reach out to you tomorrow if you'd like and make some connections so you can figure out what the state is.
Yeah, that'll work. Thank you.
I also wanted to add that I think to make our recommendation stronger on the no-knock warrant specifically, we can just ask that it be defined and that it's in the manual. And that way the training newsletters and the manual, all of that is contiguous and there's a go-to place for everybody to see it and it's provided to the public.
Thank you, Ms. Bilal. Oh, Mr. Matthews, is your hand raised? Sorry.
Yeah, I had it raised, but Captain Oliver said I just wanted to be fair to MMPD and to Councilmember Pulley's comments. MMPD has looked and compared their policy to to 8 Can't Wait, and they have showed us a document where they actually listed what their new policy should be. Now, whether they updated the manual and that manual is showing the same thing that's in this document, that's what's really a question. So I didn't want it to sound like MMPD hadn't done any work to address 8 Can't Wait. They have, but there are some inconsistency in documents that we've seen on the website.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone. This is a space where everyone is well-intentioned here, and it's okay for us to go through this diligence and to find spaces where there are opportunities. There is nothing wrong with it. It is an opportunity for us to have a fair assessment and to strengthen the very people that keep us safe every day. So I want to encourage everyone to continue this dialogue like Mr. Robinson was saying. And sorry about the puppy. I did ask down today, but it does not matter. I don't run anything in this house with this dog. So let me, I know we have next here the use of force. Let me just actually, if you all don't mind, I'd like to go in order of how it's listed on the document in front of us, because I'm about to send everyone a new document with every subcommittee's content. So with that could be use of force, the data committee, could you go next? And then by the time we move from this, I'll have everyone's together. I believe that Ms. Lucas, is that your team? Sorry if I'm wrong, let me know here.
I'm so sorry. I thought you were referring to Mira being on the data committee. I am actual racial disparities. I believe that Warwick, Rachel, and Larry are use of force.
Got you. Okay. Yep. I have. Yep. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry, I just didn't pick up on where we were going there. So, our review was use of force. We obviously gained a lot of knowledge from our visit to the training academy, and we were able to actually visualize maybe what's going on from the lens of the officer, especially if you were able to step into the simulator. And that was an interesting thought and process to look through a different lens. Our recommendations really are fundamental in nature. And our first recommendation goes back to an issue that I think comes to the forefront of every citizen's mind, and that is the constant use of body cameras. We all felt like the trainers were providing good training and using the facilities and using their manpower to the best of their ability and to what the budget is there, or the budget that they're provided. But we all feel like the use of body cameras creates more of an equal footing. You know, in my practice of law, we always say the video doesn't lie. And the cameras are there not only to protect individuals, lay people, but they're also can serve to protect the officers. And that one stood out in the forefront to us. The next recommendation was to create within an office within the MNPD that would report directly to the chief of police on what the videos are showing, what is being reviewed, if there's a pattern of conduct that is consistent and that is bothersome. This office would also, in our mind, be used to communicate with the training academy, to outline issues that they see, outline concerns. Obviously, if things are done well, then the training academy and the individual precincts would get a good review. I know we talked about supervisors in the last discussion having more training for the supervisors, and based on what we see, we think this office would also have the ability to communicate with the supervisors at the precincts, and instead of it would just create accountability with the video cameras and within the department and the use of the video. The third recommendation we had was to that the MNPD undergo a diversity assessment and subsequently create a diversity plan that will, among other things, improve diversified hiring practices, including recruitment and internal promotions. We're kind of bleeding over a little bit into another committee there, but that was something that we saw as that relates to excessive force. We think that diversifying the department as a whole creates unity, creates teamwork, and they're taught to have accountability for each other. And just in our review, we think that is going to help ultimately to ensure the training is applied on the streets for accountability and to stop the excessive force. Instead of pushing from the top down, try pushing from the bottom up on accountability for excessive force. And Rachel and Larry, jump in here if I'm missing something here. We had a lot of recommendations. Our fourth was to continue to emphasize de-escalation and less use of deadly force by officers. The training should be reviewed annually, including a regular review of the national best practices. It looked like some of that is being done, but as Captain Oliver indicated, you don't always see it in the documentation. And I think we, as the citizens of the city, would like to know that that's happening. Because we're on this committee, some people have friends in the department, they can ask those kind of questions, but how can the average person that wants to find out that information, how do they get that? So let's see. To continue the training, the repetitive practice and improved resources are imperative to the controlling and diminishing the excessive use of force on the streets. I think one thing we learned is that there's not enough training done. They would like to do more training. When they have officers in training, that means they're off the streets. Precincts are running low on people. But there's got to be a solution, because we feel like training is the key to the excessive force issues. Recommendation 5, improve appropriate response to mental health calls and an increased partnership with the mental health co-op. Adopt a policy and practices that will improve response to the mental health issues. The theory behind this is training the officers to work smarter, not harder, especially as it deals with mental health patients, mental health calls. Bringing out 12 cars for a mental health patient, just it creates a big issue. But if all of the officers are on the street, if they're trained properly and they can get mobile crisis there, and none of us have an answer for mobile crisis because they have a budget just like everybody else. But if we can train the people the officers on the street to where they don't need backup of 6 to 8 cars, it's again going to cut down on the excessive force, because if they're prepared to deal with mental health issues, then they should be able to de-escalate and not have to use force or excessive force, especially. There was a lot of talk around excited delirium, what it is. It was very eye-opening for me. I'd heard that term for years, but I never realized that excited delirium meant that an individual is actually in the process of dying. That person is dying unless they get help. So I'm trying to recall, I know we wanted more training on excited delirium, being able to identify excited delirium and understand the protocol for excited delirium. Excited delirium should be a bigger, more talked about issue in Nashville, to where not only officers but other individuals can identify and assist with excited delirium, because sending an ambulance at the same time when an officer has to call for an ambulance, then there's just delays all around. The last recommendation, adopt a policy related to all new recruits and active officers, emotional, mental health, and psychological well-being, and physical fitness for the job. To review and update as needed a policy around the officers' interactions with MNDP, the department therapists. And I know there's possibly HIPAA issues there, but just trying to make sure that officers are getting what they need, that they can work through these issues they encounter on the streets emotionally, and what warrants these visits that officers, is there a policy mandating somebody? It's called PASS, police assisted something services, where they can get counseling, and their spouses and family can also get counseling at no charge, which is a really nice thing to have. In conclusion, we believe the MNPD should consider following and integrating into the practice much of the final report of the President's Task Force, the 8 Can't Wait. It is the opinion of this subcommittee that Metro Nashville, the police department, provides excellent above standard training to new recruits and all officers on excessive force and the use of force. They utilize the force continuum and train well on the levels of control and levels of resistance. It's also the opinion of this subcommittee that in order to more fully and thoroughly and appropriately implement the training that is provided, additional and improved training resources and up-to-date on-the-job resources, equipment are needed. If excessive force and use of force practices remains a priority and a primary concern for the department and the Nashville community, it is imperative that additional resources be allocated to improve the good programs already in place and to fully integrate the appropriate practices through this department. Also, the accountability and checks and balance reviews must be established to ensure successful adoption of policies, practices, and appropriate integration of training. See, my friends like Lonell and Russ, they know how much lawyers like to talk, and we didn't intentionally. We were just trying to be thorough, and Rachel and Larry did an excellent job putting this together, and that's our report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. I suffer from the same illness. Don't worry, I understand. The lawyers like to talk. I get it. Let's go to the conversation here. I see Mr. Pulley and Mr. Matthews.
I believe Mr. Matthews had his hand raised before mine, so I'm going to defer to him.
Perfect.
My hand was from last time. I just didn't lower it, Councilman.
Okay, thank you, Lionel. I just have a brief comment. Again, I'm absorbing all of this, so I'm reacting to it. But I will tell you my reaction to this is I'm pretty impressed with what I hear out of your committee, Mr. Robinson, and I commend you and Ms. Freeman and Mr. Woods for your work, because my reaction to all these things is they're very good recommendations. The very first one you made with body cameras, I think you're spot on with everything you said about that. It's very important for everybody, for the community, from a transparency standpoint. It's also evidence, and it's also evidence that police officers, I can tell you, when I wore a uniform, the greatest evidence I could ever carry into a courtroom is video evidence. Otherwise, you're talking about witness statements, you, the officer, being one of the witnesses. So, but as I look through the rest of your recommendations, quite clearly, in this day and age, transparency is a must. The diversity situation needs to improve. We clearly need a police department that looks like its community, and I believe that the police department's working towards that. But that's an outstanding recommendation. And as I reflect on my analysis of some of the recent high-profile incidents, and I look back on how things were culturally when I came along in this profession, mental health, all of these things police officers deal with makes this job tremendously difficult. And in order to do it right, it's going to be more challenging and more dangerous, quite frankly. Because when I look at some of these responses, I think police officers are going to end up having to really put themselves more at risk to implement some of these things, which I think are appropriate. And I'd love to talk more about this as we move forward. But in short, so I don't really sound like a lawyer, I'm just thankful for you guys, and I think you did wonderful.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you. Any other comments or reactions, questions for the excessive force subcommittee? Mr. Wood?
Yes, I just wanted to echo everything Warwick said and really emphasize the 2 or 3 points he made about training. Remember back early in our educational process on these committees, we heard from the training officers who run the training, and I know, of course, the interaction that I couldn't attend out at the training academy the other night. They clearly view their job the way they ought to, that we're going to help make great police officers here. And I think for our committee, not just the subcommittee, but our entire committee, if we continue the progress we've made so far, if we give the department the right policies, then the really important thing does become the training. And we need to really keep a sharp eye, I think, focused on money for training, that the budget, that the new chief of police, permanent chief of police, recognizes the importance of training. Training can solve so many of the problems that we all know exist out there. So I just want to echo and reinforce what Warwick said about that. And Councilmember Pulley, we all know you really want to be a lawyer. You've messed with all of us so long, you know how much we enjoy it. Well, some of the times enjoy it. Thank you for those comments, Councilmember. I appreciate it.
I was pausing there, Mr. Woods, to let Mr. Pulley acknowledge and accept that comment.
I'm looking for my mute button so I could thank you, Larry, for those kind words. I really know you want to be a council member, but you're you're happy to let us do it.
Just as much as you want to be a lawyer, I want to be. But you do have an orange UT shirt on, right?
Unfortunately,
Fancy
that's a
shirt.
Fiesta Bowl shirt. I couldn't dare wear one of
All
those.
right,
I'd get
you're
in
in good
trouble.
hands. And I want to let me take one more sentence. I want to thank Rachel Pring for all the work she did on getting this report ready. I mean, all three of us worked on this course, but Rachel really put in the time and effort on it.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Freeman. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Lucas.
Yeah. Again, returning to the issue of overlap, I know that there's going to be a lot of overlap, not just within our policy committee with our subcommittees, but also with other committees. And just based off conversations that we had with Mayor Dean at one of our vice chair and chair luncheons, I believe that the workforce committee, and I apologize, Mayor Dean, if you're still on the call, can't remember who the workforce chairs are, but that issue of diversity and specifically creating that plan for how to diversify the ranks is very much, I think, going to be one of the focuses, foci, I can't remember the plural, of that committee. So just to flag that for your work on the 14th, that may be one that workforce can take up. But it's an excellent suggestion, and thank you so much for your hard work on that.
Ms. Lucas, would you like to present your subcommittee's findings, sir?
Be happy to. So my subcommittee was racial disparities in the use of force. And we consulted, as everybody has, several different sources and reports. They all seem to blur together after a certain time. But our recommendations are that in addition to its current duties of investigating complaints, MNCO, referring to the Metro Nashville Community Oversight, should conduct quarterly random audits of MNPD records, including arrest reports, body and dash cam footage, personnel files, etc., to determine whether racial and/or economic bias appears to be a factor in arrests. I really liked what the subcommittee had to say about creating an office, but I believe that in order to institute true accountability and to address the consistent concerns of the community, I'm not sure that that review needs to happen internally within the department. I believe that can be accomplished by the community oversight and is probably better located in a non-department agency. So just wanted to share that, but that should be included in an auditing process so that, you know, at random, you know, however many officers, you know, 50 officers, you know, get audited quarterly, just to make sure that there are no indications of racial bias. The second recommendation, talk about overlap, is that no knock, knock and announce, or any kind of forced entry to execute an arrest warrant or a search warrant presents an unacceptable risk of harm or death to the community and or the officers involved. Use of forced entry should be reserved for those instances in which the suspect is wanted for a violent offense. This is a conversation that has occurred within law enforcement and between law enforcement and the community before. And you might, those of us who've been following this issue for decades now will know that high-speed chases were something that used to be kind of commonplace. It's kind of a joke around the Los Angeles area that, you know, about how that was sort of entertainment for the populace to see high-speed car chases. It was decided after some time that it just presented too great a risk of harm to the community and to the officers involved, and that unless the suspect fleeing was wanted for a very serious crime, that officers were not to pursue suspects in a high-speed situation. We believe that the same holds for these knock and announce warrants, and I think it would do our committee really well to just use the term forced entry. You know, whether it's no knock, whether it's knock and announce, I believe Dr. Jackson was correct that, for all intents and purposes, it is no knock. If you knock, like poor Ms. Hines, and give her, 3 seconds to respond, for all intents and purposes, that is no knock. So if we could just call it forced entry, that forced entry, especially in that situation with Edge Hill, it wasn't just the fact that the information was incorrect. It could have been the correct suspect's home, but he was a juvenile wanted on a very low level. It was burglarizing a vehicle. There's no reason to put the officers or families, even if it was the suspect's home, much less the poor resident who had nothing to do with the situation, at risk. As in the case in Louisville, where the person in Breonna Taylor's apartment thought that he was experiencing a home invasion and he tried to defend himself. It put that officer that was shot at risk. It ended in the tragic death of Breonna Taylor. Unless it's a very serious offense, there is really no reason to risk the lives of our citizens and our officers in that way. And so we would ask that until more can be done around the issue warrants, that unless it's a violent offense, that we discontinue the practice of forced entry. Part of that recommendation was that the SWAT team should submit and this was a recommendation of the ACLU, the SWAT team should submit a quarterly report to the Community Oversight Office that contains the number of times the SWAT team was activated or deployed, as well as lots of different specific factors: rage, sex, age of everybody that was encountered. We had a recommendation to discontinue the program called Operation Safer Streets, which we have discussed, I believe, previously in this committee, which really revolved a lot around the increased traffic stops. I believe when Dr. Valier was presenting, we talked about the astronomical number of traffic stops. I did receive an email earlier today from Acting Chief Drake that said that Operation Safer Streets has been officially ended, but it is incredibly important, the issue that Captain Oliver raised about ensuring that that is codified in the manual. It is actually written policy that there will no longer be Operation Safer Streets be executed in Nashville. And the fourth recommendation, also an overlap, was about excited delirium. Excited delirium is not a clinical diagnosis and should not be taught at the academy. Without specialized training, police officers are not qualified to diagnose the underlying etiology of a suspect's inability to comply. ED has been demonstrated to be utilized disproportionately to pathologize the behavior of young Black men. If officers on the scene suspect a medical emergency, and I understand, I believe it was Officer Pereira who was explaining that ED was treated as a medical emergency, then they should call for EMTs and train mental health providers to assess the suspect and recommend an appropriate course of action. And so there were also a few more recommendations because I believe we also needed a piece that involved other agencies besides MNPD. In the event that an officer uses an all points bulletin, also known as an APB, as a justification for stopping and or arresting a suspect, that officer must include those details of the APB or the DEC, the Department of Emergency Communications, notice in their notes or their report. Mayor Cooper and MMPD should meet with community organizations such as the Health Department, the Department of Emergency Communications, the Mental Health Co-op, Campus for Human Development, to convene a task force to implement the CAHOOTS model of mental health crisis response in Metro Nashville, Davidson County by October of next year. Metro Nashville Community Oversight should review all requests for receipts of weapons and vehicles under the 1033 program, which is the transfer of military equipment. Also requests for grant funding from the federal government that will be used to purchase military style weapons and vehicles, and proposals to purchase military style weapons and vehicles from vendors. And the final recommendation was that community events should be held where residents are given information as to alternatives for crisis response, such as Gideon's Army, Mental Health Cooperative, Centerstone, et cetera, so that they know that there are other resources out there should they require assistance, but it not be a situation in which the police need to be called.
Thank you, Ms. Oh, I'm so sorry. I cut you off. Please feel free to unmute. No, it's your show. You go right ahead. I just want to make sure there are any questions, so feel free. You can field your own questions. Feel free.
I'm not a lawyer, but I am just as worried.
I'm sure my partner would say, well, thank God for that. She says every time she says that. Let me just ask you the same thing I was asking Captain Oliver earlier. If you were to prioritize that, just to point out, because we've been asked to think about things in both short term and long term, is there a short term 30-day, 60-day that the new chief needs to keep in mind and could put in place right away to show real progress?
I absolutely feel like there's consensus from everything that I've heard that we should ask for an immediate suspension of forced entry, except in those cases where the suspect is wanted on a violent offense or is considered to be a threat to, a danger to the community, obviously, or to themselves, of course. Officers, Eric Muma was an officer who gave his life trying to rescue a suicidal citizen. Those cases are also very dangerous as well. But, if someone is a threat to their own self or to somebody else, then by all means. But I think that should be more immediate. And I believe the issue of audits is an incredibly important step towards accountability. So I think that, may not be something that we can take an immediate step toward, but it's something that I think needs to involve community oversight.
Councilman Pulley.
It's not my desire to talk on every one of these things, but I did mention with respect to the no-knock warrant, I did have a comment when Mr. Matthews brought it up. I think the way this thing has been framed by Ms. Luke and their committee is ideal, because my concern is to eliminate the possibility of a no-knock situation when that's the only thing that's prudent to save somebody's life. I don't think is responsible. But the way it was framed by Ms. Lucas, I think is ideal. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any additional questions or comments here for Ms. Lucas?
I have a question, Amanda. I guess, in the world we live in, saying suspending any type of forced entry, I guess I do have an issue just putting a blanket. We're not going to have any forced entry anymore. Trying to look at that through both lenses, I certainly see that from a community standpoint. And maybe the answer is trying to find a better balance of how to control a knock, of serving a warrant with a knock or, subsequent forced entry. I don't think any of us want to see that. But I guess I'm not comfortable just saying we're going to suspend all that permanently. And I guess I'm just creating some dialogue here too about our committee. I think you would have a lot of pushback from the department. I think you would have pushback from the district attorney's office. And I think it's finding balance. That's the key to life, right? We got to find balance. So
absolutely. And I understand exactly what you're saying, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. Part of what I think this work is about to a certain degree is not just, and I keep saying this, and I know I sound like a broken record. This is not about pointing fingers. This is not about assigning blame. This is not about detracting from any of the fine work that the department does. But there is a reason why there has been such an overwhelming response to what happened in Louisville. And that's because it has happened repeatedly. It happens in this city, it happens across this country, and it terrorizes people. We have this egregious example in Edge Hill where it was not even she had done absolutely nothing. And now she is deeply traumatized by this experience. And so it is about responding with a degree of force. If you look at the history, and I'll be happy to share with people the reports that I looked at, the reading that I've done. Like I said, I studied these issues in undergraduate and in graduate school and in my volunteer work, is that this was not what SWAT was intended to be. SWAT was intended to be and started, and I don't have to tell you this probably, as a way of rescuing people from hostage situations, or if somebody had taken over, some sort of building, or was acting in a way that threatened the larger community. It has increasingly become used for smaller and smaller offenses. It was never intended to be something that was used to execute an arrest warrant on a 16-year-old for burglarizing a vehicle, which I don't even know if that vehicle was like unlocked, So I think the issue here is what do we need to accomplish, and how can we accomplish that in a way that does not require our citizens, especially those innocent of any crime, to be terrorized? And the community has made it abundantly clear to us, and especially in NOAA and in our listening forums and in our community town halls and in our public meetings every year, that they have been terrorized by these traffic stops. They have been terrorized by forced entry, whether or not, it's no knock or what have you. And so in considering what you just said about the balance, don't want to handicap people, don't want to tie their hands or take tools away from them that they need to enforce the law. Is that, is it accomplishing what it needs to accomplish? Like Operation Safer Streets did not yield the drugs and weapons that it had hoped to do. Where is the substantiation that these kind of forced entries actually do accomplish the tasks that they're set out to do? And then we have to balance that against the harm that they do to the community. And I don't know if you were around when they were doing this was the exact debate that went on around the time of the high-speed car chase, when jurisdictions had to really come to terms with whether or not this was something that they would allow. I mean, that would happen if somebody didn't, have a license and just took off, they would high-speed car chase. So I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that. And I want you to know that all of those things were considerations when it came to, but this community has been saying for decades that they feel terrorized by these actions, and we need to respond to those concerns in a way that helps build that trust back. And that's the goal, really, is to build back that trust and that collaboration and that feeling that the department protects everybody and does not terrorize one group of people in order to protect another group of people. And that's why I included that.
Thank you, Ms. Lucas. I appreciate the dialogue. I understand this is, and for good reason, we have opinions and we're pushing to learn more. I appreciate Mr. Robinson's point here that we do want to be thoughtful, and Councilman Pulley's too. We want to be thoughtful. We're not in any way trying to handicap our officers. And I may quote this maybe 2 more times before our 10 weeks are up, but Captain Oliver said something so beautiful a couple of weeks ago about that covenant between the community and those that protect us. And that's what all of us is as we look at these recommendations. So please, let's continue this dialogue. Ms. Lucas, I know you were carrying this heavy heavy load in putting it together. So congrats and thank you for the diligence that you've put into this too. Your passion doesn't go unnoticed. I appreciate that too. Mr. Woods, I see you unmuted there.
Yes, I'd like to echo what Amanda said. I do agree with her. I helped her a little bit on this committee work. She did all the real heavy lifting. This is a really critically important issue, I think, for our police department and our community, the issue of no-knock. The real issue here is there are 2 or 3 issues really wrapped together. And I wonder if we tried to separate them a little bit when we have our discussions with the mayor or the council of the police department, that it might help some. You know, no knock, no announcement warrant intrusions originally started up in drug cases, especially drug cases where the investigation, the intrusion was going to happen at night or in the dark. And the whole idea was, if we don't, from the police point of view, the whole idea was if we don't have to announce our presence, the bad guys don't get an opportunity to either flash burn the gambling receipts and paperwork, or to flush the drugs down the toilet, et cetera. And therefore, no-knock entry will help us make better cases for prosecution. And on that part of the issue, I'm 150% with Amanda. I'd rather lose a few more drug cases than put citizens, even bad citizens, at risk in the dark, and put officers at risk in the dark. You know, about 1 out of every 7 or 8 of these no-knock cases I read about and study, it's one of the officers getting hurt, usually by friendly fire or something like that. But it's just such an inherently risky situation. We can all relate to, you know, my house, I'm asleep, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and a loud bang wakes me up. Yeah, I really do understand why citizens start shooting at police thinking that they're acting in self-defense. And of course, that gets really complicated and messy for the legal system. And that's the second major issue on no-knock, no announcement intrusions by the police. Frequently, almost always, is happening at night. And the police thinking correctly as a tactic is, we can't afford to give the bad guys inside a head start in the dark. If we announce ourselves and they pile out a window or a back entrance we didn't know about, they're gone. And that's going to be a future danger to the community, and we're not going to be able to catch them, or it's going to be a lot more difficult. So bear with me a second here. Why don't we be the leader in the nation? Why don't we say to the police department, take some of that federal budget money that you used to buy of what's essentially military equipment and buy a 1 million lumen xenon portable light. And the next time the drug squad or anybody in the police is attacking the matter or worried about and want to make what's essentially a no announcement entry, set that light up and shine it. Now knock on the door. Now when I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, I see everything outside. It's the kind of lighting they have in Vegas. I see everything outside. The police can see everything outside and everything inside when they open the door. And now I know it's the police. They're in uniform. Now the police can see the bad guys separate from the innocent witnesses who happen to be there, separate from their fellow officers. Investing some money and changing the tactic to say, okay, we may lose a few drugs, we may lose a few gambling paraphernalia cases, but we're still going to get the shock impact by the light, not by the unannounced entry. And the use of that kind of mobile light power is going to enable us to deal with whatever the criminal threat is safely, or at least much more safely than all of us fumbling around in the dark. I don't care how well trained our officers are. When you put them in the dark in a situation where maybe they've looked at the blueprint of the layout of the house, but they've never been in it, of course, mistakes are always going to happen. And when we're dealing with the kind of firepower everybody uses these days, police and non-police, those mistakes usually mean somebody gets killed or very, very seriously injured. And maybe thinking about different tactics, such as the use of a mobile light tower, could eliminate much of the police anxiety about how do we make entry in a safe, cautious manner in the middle of the night, and at the same time, you know, create some protection for everybody involved in the situation. I don't know if how practical it is. I don't know if the military will sell those light towers to the police. I can't imagine they wouldn't. It's worth exploring. It's worth thinking about. We need to try to develop better tactics than we've been using in the past. My first choice is we just eliminate all unannounced entry and all but unannounced entry. But I understand the police concerns here. The good officers are worried about safety for themselves and for innocent bystanders. I think thinking in terms of different tactics, such as using high-power xenon lights, could lead us in a good direction.
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, quickly on this, I think the issue is somewhat kind of in the middle ground. I think it's a concern that we have these, that forced entry is always got a high probability or possibility at least of things going wrong, people being hurt, so on and so forth. I think that it's right that the commission, that this group express our concerns and our desire that the police department look seriously at how and if and how they should develop policies to respond appropriately in these kinds of cases, with the idea of reducing both the potential danger for themselves and for the individuals upon whom the search warrant, arrest warrant are being issued. I'm not sure we're in the best position to kind of devise the policies and the procedures. I think we express concerns. I think there are issues that are important on both sides, and we ought to express that. But as far as saying categorically, except in certain limited circumstances, we ought to ban all forced entry, I think is maybe going beyond what we ought to do at this point, and simply put the onus on the police department and consultants or anybody else they want to look at as to how they should do things. You know, you're absolutely right about the development and the change, and the policies have changed greatly from high-speed chases. No question about that. You're right about the SWAT development. Is that's what it was originally for. They started using it though because more and more, particularly in the drug situation, police officers were finding that they were running into drug dealers that were better armed than the police, and so consequently, the way to protect the rank and file police officers was to call SWAT. So it was originally designed for a way to protect officers rather than to create sort of a militaristic approach in every case. Perhaps SWAT's being used too often. Perhaps it's being used in situations it doesn't need. But those are things that I think we express a concern. We express our desire that it be looked at in a serious way. And I think that your points about the community and the trust of the community and the feelings of the community are very, very relevant and something that need to be considered. And so I'm kind of in the middle on both. I see both sides as something that we ought to ask the police department, at least initially, to and the new leadership in the police department, to address.
Let me ask a question, because I think you make excellent points as well, Mr. Johnson. And I had thought about this as part of the language, and I put it in and took it out and put it in and took it out. But what if it was like a temporary suspension? Again, not talking about people who are a threat to themselves or others. That's not, not what we're talking about. What about a temporary suspension until there could be that sort of, whether it's consultants or a task force or Nashville community oversight, to convene a committee to look at the issue, to look at you know, what Larry said, or is there technology out there that could, you know, aid the officers? How would you all, because I think your concerns are very valid, about something like that, where it's a temporary suspension pending looking at what are best practices, what are some maybe new and innovative ways to go about executing these warrants so that officers have those tools at their disposal while balancing the needs of the community. Would that satisfy some of those concerns if the recommendation came along with like, okay, temporarily until this group can come up with some recommendations?
Ms. Lucas, I think you spoke very clearly. I think we're going around and around and around.
Okay.
You were part of this committee. You spoke clearly, very clearly, and you distinguished between simple cases such as a 16-year-old who had burglarized some cars. That's not a reason, but somehow that was okay. And for whatever reason that was okay, that needs to be addressed. And we can go around and around and around, but it's happening. So it's not like it never existed. So that's the part of it that needs to be addressed. Now, if it's a serious hostage situation and something like a mass murderer is holed up in of course, please don't knock. But all of this other, I mean, we can just go around and that's what we're doing right now. But this is what you said. It was very clear. It was very clear, and thank you for your work.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. I appreciate your comments.
Hey, Madam Chair, if I can comment.
Sure, of course.
You know, on the things Mr. Woods talked about as far as lighting that goes on when police officers or SWAT officers conduct a search warrant, you know, that's good in theory, but I really don't think our committee should be advising the police on tactics that they need to do to save someone's life inside or themselves outside. So a lot of the reasons for a no-knock search warrant that SWAT would complete would be that the danger is too great for the SWAT officers who stand at the door and bang on it when a gentleman is inside with a 12-gauge shotgun that shoots through the door and hits the officers. So that's a lot of reasons for a no-knock search warrant as far as SWAT conducting it. And I was on the team for 22 years and never was involved in a no-knock search warrant. Like the captain said, Captain Alexander, a week ago, they just don't conduct very many of those at all. But the issue on the whole lighting thing is, you know, if you know about tactics, if you're up at the door and you produce these bright lights behind you, then what happens is the people inside see you better than you see them inside. I mean, it's kind of common sense. You stand outside with your lights on inside the house, it's dark outside, look inside and see who sees who better. So it puts the officers in a very dangerous spot to do that kind of tactic. So that's kind of why I say we need to leave the tactics to the people who do that for a living, not us who are trying to judge what they do for a living. If that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any additions here before we move to the next subcommittee? Ms. Freeman, apologies.
No problem. Thanks, Ms. Davis. My comment is about a different recommendation, so I hope that's okay to switch gears just a little bit.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your the committee's attention to the mental health crisis response recommendation. My only curiosity is around the recommendation to implement the CAHOOTS model. If I remember correctly, I know Ms. Brock with Mental Health Co-op suggested 3 different models for consideration. And of those 3, I think there was a lot of conversation around whether cities have the right funding and infrastructure to do which one. That played a part into the selection of the model. So my question was just around how did the subcommittee get to the model for recommendation?
Great question. Thank you so much. This is an issue that NOAA, the group that I am a volunteer with and I represent on the commission, has done quite a bit of research around, and you're correct, Amanda Brock did talk about a co-response model. I believe that that comes from the collaboration that the mental health co-op and the MNPD have been working on for several years. As you may remember from Dr. Valier's presentation, the mental health response kind of was on a continuum from the crisis intervention team model, the CIT model, or the Memphis model, which was police officers being trained in mental health issues, through a more co-response model. I believe Los Angeles was one of the cities where it was like an officer, an EMT, and a mental health, through the CAHOOTS model, which is a model that's been around for about 30 years in Eugene, Oregon, and Springfield, Oregon. And there's a lot of information around that model that I'm happy to present more on. We had talked about maybe having Matthew Barge, who's part of both the Policing Project and a group called 21st Century Policing. In something like 21,000 calls, they had to call the police like 100 times or something like this. The program itself costs about $2 million and saves the city $17 million in costs. And so after our analysis of all these things, we have come to the consensus that and this is again what the community has told us through all of our community meetings, all of our sort of community town halls and surveys and engagement, that they would like a community-based model. And so that's why that recommendation was included. You know, again, one of the things I did want to emphasize to people is that these were preliminary recommendations, as everybody's aware of. And so it was, I think, anticipated that we would have some dialogue around it. But there are programs out there, and other cities are reaching out to Eugene and Springfield, and beginning, even New York City is considering implementing CAHOOTS, that it pays for itself, really, in the way that it's used. So that's why that was included, but it's certainly up for discussion and dialogue.
Thanks so much for that response, Ms. Lucas. I really appreciate it. And I'm not suggesting that we not consider recommending implementation of the CAHOOTS model. I just want to make sure we don't recommend something that MPD can't get to by this time next year. And that's my reason for bringing it up.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. It's a great point. Good. Mr. Woods?
No.
Okay. Anyone else here? I see. Well, it's Ms. Lucas. I see your hand raised. I believe that was from earlier. Any additional comments here? Okay. And we have just two left here, but I'd like to go procedures, I believe, led by Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have several recommendations here, and I also think it's important to note that although we are not unanimously in agreement, I think it's very important that all the voices be heard. So I'm going to go through all of the recommendations, and I believe Robert and Chris are on the call, so happy to let them comment as well. So let me start with one of the big problems that I personally have seen within the ranks of the police department is morale. You know, we've heard a lot about morale relating to discipline under different chiefs, and there also seem to be many contributing factors to that. And we've gone over a lot of them, but oops, what is going on? Something's wrong with my dog here. But the effect can also be seen with difficulty recruitment and retention, which also has a negative impact on minority recruitment and retention, which is a part of the process. So discipline issues also, in my estimation, continue to contribute to that. So I have to examine the disciplinary practices. Frustrations encountered by employees with the disciplinary process include timeliness and consistency. So currently, there's a 45-day time limit on OPA investigations. Once the investigation is complete and disciplinary decisions are made, the employee has the option of requesting a hearing before the chief or before an advisory board. There's currently no timeline spelled out for that hearing, and there are instances where it has taken in excess of 6 months to conduct such a hearing, which is designed to give an employee
Councilman Pulley, I believe we lost you a connection. Okay. Maybe if you turn your video off, we should be able to hear you, though. It says something about bandwidth, I believe. And could just another member, you also lost contact or can't hear Mr. Pulley?
I can't hear or see Mr. Pulley.
Okay.
Okay, so I can kind of chime in a little bit. We all came up with a
voice.
Your colleague was stepping in for you there. Sherelle was leading us there in your absence, but yeah, totally up to you, gentlemen, how you want to proceed. Right. Mr. Pulley, if you wouldn't mind, actually, it might be helpful if you could, can you dial back in perhaps? And then we could keep moving. Mr. Sherelle, if you'd like to continue here, you all tell me what you'd prefer to do.
Yes, I mean until he, I don't want to delay us any longer. So we have several recommendations, and I'll read some and tell you. MNPD has a 7-tier disciplinary system: remedial training, formal counseling, oral, written, suspension, resignation, and termination. However, Form 108 is to be completed by the employee involved in the use of force incident. Said personnel shall notify the appropriate supervisor immediately and complete an MNPD Form 108 use of force report. The completion of this form is done by the employee involved. However, due to issues with the community and its trust of police and such a lax approach to reporting, there will be inadequacies and misinformation given. Many people will not be willing to report use of force due to perceptions about the police department. So our recommendation on that is that Form 108 should be mandatory despite injury or soft, empty hand contact between officer and any non-MNPD person. So, it's a lot of vague information pertaining to the soft, open hand and what that means versus lethal force, and based on that, the officer can actually come up, can say, A, I don't want to fill out the 108 form, or B, I will fill out the 108 form, which a supervisor would have to step in and kind of do an investigation before it's reported. But what's stopping the person from complaining and a colleague saying, oh, it's not that bad. You are right. Yeah, you bumped your head. He may slammed your head in the concrete, but it's okay. And I'm not going to fill out a Form 108. I think there should be, kind of stiffer guidelines as it pertains to that. So that's kind of how I came up with that one. Another recommendation is a clear definition of broad terms like serious bodily injury and injury for determined disciplinary actions. Any hospitalization of an individual should automatically warrant removal from line of duty and field assignments until formal investigation has been completed. Instead of leaving it open-ended, like I said, there needs to be real life policies. I think in order to gain the trust of the community, there definitely needs to be policies enacted that reflect these recommendations in order to gain that trust, because again, you need the trust of the community in order to police it correctly. Clear definition of despite Section C, all firearm discharges as a result of negligence of an incident should be investigated and reviewed by the Force Review Board. due to the resulting issues that can come from negligent or accidental discharge. These items have to be treated as if they resulted in injury to prevent or decrease the likelihood of it happening. And in conclusion, MNPD presented figures about disciplinary procedures that supported the idea that there were not many infractions. However, after further digging and researching, there are still too many unknowns and broadly defined and laid out in the regulations, rules, and manuals. By clearly defining certain expectations, we will create a standard of use of force in this city. The operating pieces are already there, meaning that these recommendations will take more time than actual fiscal allocations. Providing this type of information will also allow for increased trainings in various areas. So thank you. That's some of my recommendations. Some of my other subcommittee members had other recommendations. So we had like a wide range of recommendations. And so we all kind of took our individual approach and then kind of collectively we're presenting. So that's kind of my approach.
Thank you very much. Any additional? Thank you for your work on that. I think we have Mr. Pulley back and also Dr. Jackson. Do you have anything to add?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Good. All right. Yeah, we kind of had our own. I don't know how much you've heard of the first recommendation. My contribution to the recommendations was a 45-day time limit on the hearing. The time from an employee requested a hearing until the time the hearing occurred. This is subsequent to the OPA investigation because there was a lot of there were incidents where there was a lingering time out there. So that was what my recommendation was. I do want to comment, however, on some of the other recommendations. I have some concerns about some of the things that have been asked, like
Councilman Pulley, I think we lost you again. If possible, I know we have some great help on outside. Could we see if we could perhaps get him to just dial in the way Mr. Allen is, and we won't be able to hear him, but can't see him, but hear him rather. In the meantime, Dr. Jackson.
Mr. Pulley?
Yeah, we're losing you again.
Mr. Pulley, is there any way, are you on a mobile device? Are you on a device that's connected to your Wi-Fi? You might be able to just move closer to your router and it may help.
I'm sitting on top of my router.
Well, maybe that's the problem then. Move away from the router.
If not, it'd be great if you could dial in. That'd be a good.
Give me. I'll just go ahead. I'll tell you what, I don't want to take up any more time because I'll send my comments in writing to avoid having everybody having to put up with this. Thank you.
Mr. Pulley, it's all right. We have all had Wi-Fi issues. There's grace in this new virtual world. Don't you worry about it. Dr. Jackson, though, I see you unmuted.
No, I was just about to chime in before he came in, and I did some edits that sent to my, hopefully both of them received those edits that were sent. And then once he received them, he will compile them and then send them in for everyone to review.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. In fact, what I have right now, representative of final for us to do. And if you could just look in that column, it will be in that far right column, and make sure that what you just shared is in there. Will be helpful as well. But that's very helpful. Okay, so let me just pause. Are there any other questions, comments here related disciplinary procedures subcommittee? Okay, let me. I'm going to and Ms. Balai email here. I realize that we didn't get a chance to include this, what you just shared here in our meeting, so I can include that with the preliminary recommendations. Ms. Bilal, before I go to the last subcommittee, could you just give us an overview of what you just shared with me as it relates to that recommendations, and then folks will have a bit of context?
Yes, well, and this is just something that we've been working, that David Esquivel and I have been working on together, and that I assume we will be presenting in data on Wednesday when we do that half-day meeting. But I wasn't sure if that's information for this committee or that committee. So I just sent it to you because some of the things that we are recommending are not on our chart. So do you want me to go over items that David and I have put together?
I think it's helpful for the committee, especially as you're representing, the policy committee on that. And I will work now to just forward that over. But if you could give us an overview, and look, we only don't, I know everyone's kind of reading and digesting at the same time, but feel free to both listen to Ms. Bilal here and then give me, reply all with feedback or thoughts to that. So that would be great.
Okay, and so these are items that I don't think that stuff that David and I have been talking about is necessarily overlap with what we've discussed tonight. So these might be things that we want to include, because I felt like these were things our committee was touching on and were things that I brought to the data committee. But I think that we overall felt that the heart of the problem is really using excessive force and using force disproportionately on minorities. And so we were looking very specifically at the training manual and the actual newsletters that kind of describe what is going on in the trainings. And we found that they really were not contiguous necessarily. So things that maybe in training that were prohibitions were not listed as prohibitions in the manual, like chokeholds or certain de-escalation tactics, things like that. And so one of our recommendations is that the manual and the training policy and procedures and newsletters should all go hand in hand. And that really is not happening right now in our review, which may lead to some of the confusion that we're getting. We also felt like, in general, that de-escalation tactics should be required before force is used, and that should be one of our policies. And if they're not used, then disciplinary action should be taken. We think that de-escalation tactics actually needs to be defined in the manual so people understand the policy and the techniques associated with it. When I talk about techniques, I'm talking about, I learned a lot when we visited the academy, and they gave us that chart that kind of went from whatever it was, 1 to 10, where the first is officer presence in a uniform, that goes then down to pulling a gun, and how it seemed like you got pretty fast to 10 with not maybe a ton of de-escalation things listed specifically that can be done prior to that time. And what I'm talking about is verbal warning, slowing the pace, waiting it out, creating distance, use of specialized teams. Those were all things that I learned a lot more about that night that really aren't in the manual. And I think that they should be. We almost think maybe a pyramid or a chart should be in there that actually shows this very clearly, how efforts in de-escalation should take place. We also felt there should be an annual training of supervisors and officers. There is one now for all sworn officers, but supervisors maybe need to have a breakout that is separate, that has maybe specific topics that are included in their annual trainings. And some examples would be like what we discussed: how to conduct use of force investigations, how to intervene to stop use of force if that happens with the team that you're a part of, how to stop officers that you're with when they are using a force that you do not think is acceptable, and then making sure that there are rules, that there is no retaliation against you internally within the police force when you're trying to stop other officers that are not using de-escalation techniques. We also said that we felt like there should be some kind of CIT program that should be part of our recommendation. There's a lot of ways to define CIT. I'm talking about specialized units. We felt like that they should have community involvement with them. When we say CIT, it's not just it's not police officers trained to do everything, but actually community multidisciplinary teams that are part of this. And the great examples that we've already talked about tonight, non-compliant individuals that are maybe non-compliant due to medical or mental conditions, drug use, PTSD, language barriers, hearing impaired, all of these things where we feel like someone else in the community that's highly specialized could come in and help in these scenarios. I said there should actually be a chart for the use of force and a scale that we recommend. A force investigation team should probably be created to investigate force anytime we have serious injury or death. We think that we should track every use of force incident that happens in Metro Nashville, that we should make a report annually of it, and it should be available to the public. It should include demographic breakdown information so we can understand racial disparities. It should also show use of force over time. It should show trends so that it actually becomes a document that is useful to us. And again, critical that it should be available to the public. We also think that there should be reporting on our efforts in diversity within the police force. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's, I think, 73% white male. We know that's something we need to work on. That needs to be part of the annual report too, and how we are making efforts to be more diverse. We actually, in the last meeting in the data committee, looked into the age of our sworn police officers right now, 1/3 of which are on the brink of retirement. So there's going to be a huge turnover. And then we also looked at age, and our very, very youngest officers are the ones that are part of the Latino community, one that isn't very represented. So we really need to show and say that there are going to be efforts in diversity and how we're going to do that. And then finally, and this is kind of just a dream recommendation, but in Chicago, they have a procedural justice program to basically reduce use of force and really change police attitudes. That's something we're working on too. And they are actually collaborating with researchers to do that. And given that we are here in Nashville, Tennessee, that has Fisk and TSU and Vanderbilt, right in Belmont and right here in our hub, we are in a great position to collaborate with researchers and do randomized controlled trials. And I think we could get federal grants for that. I think that's where the money would come from. I know for a fact that Vanderbilt, at one point, not that many years ago, had some money like this for some juvenile justice reform. And they were trying to decide between Louisville and Nashville where they were going to do these randomized tests. They ended up choosing Louisville. But I think we're in a position where we really should recommend that Metro collaborate with these institutions that are already doing some of this already. And if you do that, they bring psychologists to work with police officers. I think that would be amazing, but just putting more in-depth research in what our policies are and actually allowing those to be studied. So that kind of in a nutshell were some additions that we are hoping, David and I are hoping will come out of the data community.
The timing couldn't be more perfect. Also on the procedural justice topic, we'll welcome next week Executive Director from the, believe it's from the Justice Collaboratory from Yale to talk about this. She's a national expert on this. And so I think a very perfect space for us to hear from an expert, but also to talk more about how effective it's been in cities like Chicago and other spaces. Let me yield to other members here that might have questions. And again, I will make sure I just forwarded Ms. Bilal's content and information to everyone. And I'll create a bit of a reminder that if you have any thoughts or questions, please include that in your email. Councilman Pulley, I see your hand raised. Maybe it was by accident. I know we're.
I think you're still on mute.
Yeah, you're still. Councilman Pulley, if you have, actually, he just disappeared on my line there too, so you might be okay. Ms. Bilal, we'll make sure we get. Thank you so much. I know it's been no small lift at all. So thank you for your time. I think I've said.
Well, and I'm sorry I didn't submit that. I thought that was going to the data committee, but as I was looking at all of this, it really also goes to our committee as well. So it might be something, it may be duplicative with other committees, but we may want to go ahead and put it in there if we like it, because otherwise it might not be in there. So
it's important, and we'll be at that meeting together on next Wednesday too. So we'll make sure it's appropriately placed in there. Thank you. Committee, we have just one more here, and it's the training committee. I'm a member of that committee, as well as Mr. Allen and Mr. Delgado, and the gentleman did me the good favor of putting me up to present. How about that? So I am going to lead us through here. Mr. Delgado, I believe he's not with us today because he has a well-deserved time away with his family. But Mr. Allen, as well as Mr. Delgado, and I met and had an incredibly fruitful conversation. I'm going to walk us through a bit of our thinking here, and you have it in front of you. But, just centering on our focus, we were primarily looking at the effectiveness of MMPD's current training, as well as the compliance modules as well. We all had the opportunity to attend the training academy, those that are able to be there. And I'll just share with you, what we looked at is both opportunities and where we saw spaces for improvement, but current strengths is we recognize that there's an awareness that after our assessment, that there is a difference between the intent versus the impact of the training that's happening right now, that we certainly have a police force that is not only meeting, but exceeding state and even national requirements, but they're still lacking critical categories that are not currently considered a mandatory requirement under CALEA and other national standards. Not very from the narrative we shared elsewhere. We did, of course, because of Mr. Allen's incredible thoroughness, we had very straightforward answers from various members of MMPD, also looked at current modules, and I'm just going to jump into our recommendations here. We spoke about the first recommendation and being the rebalancing of MMPD recruit and in-service training so that there's an increase in the hours of empty hand training and the integration of comprehensive trauma-informed practices. Very similar to the conversation we've heard earlier today and overlapping with both what we heard in Ms. Freeman's space, but also when Ms. Lucas spoke before. And also we spoke about ensuring that there should be a review of MMPD policies, procedures, and trainings that ensures that there's consistency between policies in the manual and the prohibitions that are covered in training. And again, that we've heard a lot about tonight already, about the development of mandatory cultural competence training that provides positive exposure to marginalized neighborhoods in Nashville and the community members as well. This focus should include education on the history of MMPD's engagement and presence with this neighborhood and community group. And it should go beyond the 1960s civil rights era training that we learned they're currently having at the downtown library and the library component. This came from a belief from our space that if you create opportunities for a safe and effective engagement with the police, that one, I think we all heard there's only 26% of new recruits are coming from Nashville, that you can get above and beyond these biases that some people come with to no fault of their own, with a lack of awareness of how to engage with communities that are diverse. And so the third one we moved to was about promotions. So we recommend that there be a review panel for promotions and the selection of training instructors that has both gender and racial diversity, in addition to required enhanced cultural competency and bias training for all managerial and training instructor promotions. It goes without saying, we saw and heard that they've made great strides in the development of an enhanced training space, but we all know that if you don't have different people around the table and in the space of instructors, that there will, without a doubt, be training that is less than inclusive of all. And so that was one of our recommendations, and just a few more. The fourth is one we've heard before, that the requirement or addition of an annual physical and psychological examination, with the mental health examination being facilitated by non-MMPD personnel. Again, if we invest in our officers so that they are fit both in physical and space, they are able to de-escalation and to appropriately engage with community members without fear in the use of excessive force. The fifth is the addition of COB education, exposure, and engagement for all new recruits that offers an opportunity to explore and discuss MMPD and COB's working relationship. We felt it was important that at a base level, as new officers are coming in, that they have an opportunity to meet the MNCO, to understand the purpose of it, and that through that conversation, those relationships over time, there will be an improvement in that exposure and that collaboration. And then second to last here is a full-scale review of MMPD's continuum of force that strongly considers and remedies the harm to community relations and the disproportionate impact that teaching police presence as a form of baseline force creates in communities of color and other marginalized communities. And this was a recommendation I myself had about. I've been looking also with what Ms. Lyle pointed out, the handout we all got, and it's counterproductive. And I'm just going to use an I statement here, my belief here, that if police presence is seen as a space on the continuum of force and used and taught in that manner, we have to understand it's not a light switch effect, and that that same presence is thereby creating fear in regard of, I don't want my community to be policed if police are not showing up in positive spaces as well. And so I'd really appreciate that there was a review of how that continuum of force is positioning and using police presence, and is it doing more harm than good in our current use of it. And last but not least is the requirement that de-escalation tactics be required before an officer uses force, be it non-deadly or deadly, and that failing to use reasonable de-escalation techniques when circumstances permit should make this officer subject to disciplinary action. I understand that waves a little bit over into the disciplinary space here quite a bit, but we feel it's important that that be taught at a base level as well. The de-escalation absolutely comes first. So I think you see at the bottom there, the training component, that we think it should be clearly stated and taught that physical force should only be used as a last resort, which is a lot of the commentary we saw. So let me yield there. Any questions, thoughts here on those recommendations, those 7? No, we're behind the hour. Totally fine. Miss Lucas, are you raised, or is that from before?
I learned how to raise my hand, but I never learned how to put it down.
Yeah, that's okay. We all deal with it. Totally fine. I know we've had a full 2 hours. It's totally fine. If anyone has any comments or questions here, and I do want to yield, Mr. Allen, anything you would add here? I forgot I don't see you on my list, but I know you're on the phone. Apologies.
No, nothing to add tonight. I might have a few comments next week, though.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So everyone, I want to thank everyone. I will send this around right after this, along with Ms. Bilal's. Well, you have that email, so you can reference that as well. Just a reminder of our next week, so October, where are we now? October 15th. We will welcome Executive Director Cernoff, as well as Captain Whitehead from the Nashville West Precinct to discuss, and he will discuss with us the MNPD's deployment and management of body-worn cameras. Following that, the week of the 22nd, October 22nd, we're scheduled to once again have a meeting like this, where we'll come back and review our recommendations, and I will be able to, along with Ms. Bilal and Ms. Lucas, review of what took place during that meeting on the 14th, and we'll finalize our recommendations. We are scheduled for a meeting on the 29th. That is scheduled to be our very last meeting unless we need to meet November 5th. But the 29th of October will mark our 10th meeting. And remember, I'm sure you all remember, we started a week before the other two committees. And so we have a little bit of, as Ms. Cirillo said, slack there to have an additional meeting. So I want to thank everyone for your diligence and time. As we always do, we always extend the floor. If there are any comments or questions before we wrap up tonight, I welcome them. Ms. Lucas, I almost caught on you, but I realize you haven't learned how to put the hand down. It's okay.
Well, I actually do have a comment, so it works out fine. I just wanted to thank everybody for all of the hard work that they put into this. This has been an incredible task, and everybody has just stepped up so much and done their part. And so I just wanted to thank you. And as we move forward, I just want to actually go back to what the thread, as a psychotherapist, part of what I do is I pick up on threads running through people's narratives. And the thread running through this narrative is that whatever we decide, whatever it is that we recommend, needs to be codified as policy and not just understood as practice. And so I just wanted to reflect that back, that just seemed to be running through. I'm sorry?
Amen.
Oh, amen. Okay.
I'm sorry I cut in. That was not right of me. I apologize. I had to.
No, not at all. Thank you, Mr. Sherrill.
Shout, Amanda.
But yeah, it sort of permeated everything we talked about tonight. So I just wanted to reflect that back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Lucas. And when the spirit hits you, it's okay. You don't mind if I'm your chair, it's okay. Whoever it hits. I want to thank everyone again. Thank you. I realize it's 8:09. Hopefully folks will have their cameras off because you were able to eat dinner during this conversation. But not, please go do so. Thanks again for everything. If you have any comments, please send them here. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Take care. Take care, everyone.
Good night.